Alrighty, so let's talk about the second half of 2.2, the endocrine system. So we've talked so far about the neural system, the nervous system, but we haven't done any work on the endocrine system, and that is the slower chemical side of the way that our body communicates. So the endocrine system, the best way that I have found to break this down is thinking about it as kind of like a team. It's much more hierarchical than the nervous system. There is kind of like ultimate processors that are like in charge of everything else. So at the top of all of this is the hypothalamus. We'll talk about that more when we get into the structures of the brain. But that is a part of the brain that more or less directs everything that's happening in the endocrine system. It links the endocrine system and the nervous system. So it's communicating with both of them at the same time, right? So the hypothalamus is the coach. Below that, while it's coaching, the endocrine system, and it's also again kind of coaching and talking about the nervous system and very much like kind of commanding what's happening a lot with a lot of the stuff in the body. The endocrine system is going to be managing, say, like if you're for football, maybe your offensive coordinator of sorts. So this is like one specific coach that's overseeing here the players of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is the biggie that you need to know, right? If you know nothing else and associate nothing else with the endocrine system, recognize and remember the pituitary gland. This is the master gland. It is the captain of the endocrine system. It does the most. But the pituitary gland, while it helps and kind of manages these other smaller, maybe lesser known, and that are a little bit more specialized versions of that gland, like adrenal gland, our sexual glands, ovaries or testes, the pancreas, and the thyroid. So hypothalamus is the big shot managing and communicating between the nervous and the endocrine systems. The endocrine system oversees clearly the system. Pituitary gland is the biggie that you should know, but underneath that, you also have thyroid, pancreas, ovaries, testes, or adrenal glands. So the endocrine system, in comparison to the nervous system, a big you should recognize that it's very slow. It's not something that's going to happen quickly, right? It's not, blasting through it at fractions of a second, but through action potential. These are chemicals. This is a chemical transmission. So it's more like, think of it more as like soaking into your system. It's slow. It's slow to add and it's slow to fade. So it takes a while for it to transport the message. Glands are the term. Basically, these are the different parts of the body that secrete these hormones into the bloodstream. We talked about a couple of those. Pituitary is the master gland, the adrenal glands, ovaries or testes. And then hormones are like the neurotransmitters of the endocrine system. These are the messengers of the endocrine system. These are the chemical messengers. They are produced in the glands, but then they travel through the body and into the bloodstream, into other tissues, including the brain. And these affect everything from sex drive to hunger to aggression, anger, stress, all of those things. The big difference, as I mentioned, is the speed at which they happen. The endocrine system takes much, much longer to travel, right? It's like over multiple seconds, sometimes minutes, and how long it takes to fully kick in. But that also means that it outlasts neural messages. Neural messages are immediate, right? They're immediate, and then they fade. They're done. They're electrical. They're on a single circuit. They do their thing, they come back. Whereas the endocrine messages are chemical. So they are, think of them more as soaking into our bodies, and then we slowly get those and we slowly lose those. Think about when if you get really stressed, you don't just snap in and out of stress or anger. You don't just like snap in and out of anger. Or if you get like your adrenaline kicks in, think how long it takes for that to cool down, right? When you get really scared, you don't just immediately get unscared, right? It fades over time, even though you know the threat's gone, because there's our chemical or endocrine messages. The hypothalamus, as we said, this is like the big coach of the entire endocrine system. This controls hunger, thirst, sex drives, and the pleasure center in the brain. It's dealing with and kind of managing the endocrine system, but again, it's also communicating with the nervous system. It is the connection between the two. The nervous system ultimately is probably in more control than the endocrine system. The nervous system, I would think of it as over the endocrine system, because those neural communications are telling the endocrine system what to do. So the nervous system and the neural communications are moving quickly. We talked about like norepinephrine as the stress neurotransmitter. And that's also norepinephrine a little bit on a confusing level. It's also a chemical hormone in the endocrine system. But the transmission of norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter, sends its way through the body and then tells the endocrine system that it also needs to kick in and start releasing adrenaline. So they're related. The nervous and endocrine systems work together, but the nervous system, it kind of sends the initial message that tells the endocrine system to kick in, and then the endocrine messages, those chemical hormones, outlast those neural messages. So glands you should know, mostly the pituitary, that's the biggie I would absolutely make sure you know. This is the master gland over all of the other glands, one gland to rule them all. It releases your growth hormones while going through puberty. The pituitary gland is managed. If your pituitary gland is damaged for some reason, people have to end up taking usually for different forms of steroids or different forms of growth hormones, whatever it is that they can to kind of artificially synthesize those growth hormones. It also releases our sex hormones. So this is the influential gland controlling all the other endocrine glands. We talked about that hierarchy, it's controlled by the hypothalamus. This is responsible for all of our puberty and growth. And the pineal gland is another one I would recognize. We'll talk about this more when we get into like sleep, wakefulness, dreams, and stuff like that. This deals with our circadian rhythm. Basically, it's what tells us when it's time to sleep. Think about, your sleepiness. You don't just like quickly be like, sleepy time, right? We slowly fade into sleepiness because our body is slowly releasing melatonin, the hormone that tells us it's time to sleep, right? It's a slow release. And then we slowly wake up as well. Same thing. Other glands, the fight or flight, we talked about that in the kind of sympathetic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, again, being automatic, orders the adrenal glands. These are the glands that are related here to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? We talk about adrenaline, adrenal glands. That's where it comes from. So our adrenal glands are releasing these two hormones. I know that's confusing because we talked about norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter. It's both. It is a neurotransmitter, but there's also a norepinephrine working together as adrenaline. Let's see what else. Yeah, we've talked about this with the sympathetic nervous system. When you're stressed, when you're in that fight or flight mode, you get that energy surge, heart rate, blood pressure, blood sugar, and then when you're stressed or when you are in a like adrenaline mode, when you're running away from something or you get scared, remember that your excitement and stuff, it's not just going to go away. It slowly fades again because it's chemical. It's not electrical. Some important hormones you should know. I'm just going to go over the highlighted ones. This is a list of most of them, but like I'm just going to go over the biggies that you really need to know. But all of them can pop up on the AP test. But again, these are the ones that I will be likely to quiz you over. So oxytocin is a biggie, also known as the cuddle hormone because it is released as a way to connect people. Right, this is very evolutionary. Oxytocin releases in men and women during sex at orgasm as a way to connect. Right, women have a large release of oxytocin while birthing as a way also to like connect you to your baby. The same thing during I'm thinking of lactation, breastfeeding. Women gain oxytocin just from that connection. So they get a release of oxytocin evolutionarily, right? It's a way for us to connect with other humans and for us to survive by doing that, right? Because, 1,000 years ago, women ultimately, when they birthed a child, that they were in a lot of danger and they needed a physical protection as well. And so having someone that felt connected to them through this oxytocin hormone was really important. Growth hormone, again, that comes from the pituitary gland as well, stimulates bone growth while we're going through puberty. Insulin, maybe you should know, but not so much for psychology. Right? It's secreted by the pancreas. This is especially, we're talking about diabetes, is an inability to produce enough insulin to help lower our blood sugar. Cortisol is basically stress. It's the adrenaline that can be released during that, but also during any just periods of minor stress as well. whenever we're stressed, we get this cortisol release. And again, think about stress. It doesn't come and go quickly. It slowly builds and slowly fades because it's chemical. And then adrenaline, that mix of epinephrine and norepinephrine, is fight or flight response in that sympathetic nervous system and stimulates our metabolism. Testosterone and estrogen are the male and female hormones when it comes to the testes and the ovaries, or the two glands that would secrete those. For men, the testosterone promotes sperm formation. Other male characteristics, with too much of it, it promotes a significant amount of aggression as well. Estrogen stimulates the uterine lining and other female characteristics, breast growth, anything having to do with puberty. Estrogen begins to grow throughout that as well. And let me see what else. Melatonin is for sleep cycle, circadian rhythm. Right, it's why people take melatonin. It's like basically they're taking a hormone, and in order to try to trick their body into going to sleep. But with all things, be careful of this, because if you take too much of that, then your body doesn't think it needs to produce any anymore, and then you're never sleepy. So if you're going to take melatonin, be careful with that. I know a few too many people that are very addicted. All right, so that's that for the hormones. So I tried to keep it quick. So we will call it a day there. That's it for 2.2. The electrical or neural and chemical or endocrine systems and forms of communication. Much love, fam.